Do you ever find yourself in conversations where everyone's laughing and connecting, but you're sitting there thinking, am I the only one who sees how surface level this all is? Do you analyze every social interaction, feel emotionally drained after group gatherings, or catch yourself seeing patterns and problems that others completely miss? Do people tell you to stop overthinking when you're just trying to consider consequences everyone else is ignoring? Well, if you're someone who thinks deeply, feels intensely, and often finds yourself misunderstood, you've clicked on the right video. Because in a world drowning in surface-level thinking and instant reactions, deep thinkers aren't just valuable, we're essential. I'm here to show you why hiding your depth is actually holding back both your potential and human progress. I've spent years analyzing psychological research on deep thinkers, from Jung's individuation process to modern neuroscience on heightened awareness. By the end of this video, I'll show you how to transform your greatest source of isolation into your most powerful advantage. You'll learn to protect your energy without losing your empathy, connect meaningfully without burning out, and use your depth strategically instead of letting it overwhelm you. Plus, I'll give you the exact three-phase system that turns emotional overwhelm into protective wisdom. But before we dive into the how, let's start with the why. Because understanding what makes you different is the key to unlocking why that difference is actually humanity's secret weapon. Now let's define what a deep thinker actually is, because you're not just someone who's sensitive or overthinks everything. You're wired for what researchers call heightened awareness. Your brain literally processes more information than the average person. Your emotional system picks up subtleties others completely miss. And your pattern recognition? It's like having an early warning system that can see connections across time and situations. In other words, you're not broken. You're a human radar system. Think about it this way. While most people are looking at individual trees, you're seeing the entire forest, the weather patterns affecting it, and how it connects to the ecosystem 3 valleys over. That's not a disorder. That's a superpower. So, here's something I need to admit right up front. I used to think being a deep thinker was basically a genetic lottery ticket to misery. You know what I mean? You see too much, feel too much, think too much, and everyone around you seems perfectly content living on the surface while you're drowning in complexity. But here's where it gets interesting. What if everything we've been told about deep thinking is backwards? Now, before you roll your eyes and think this is another embrace your sensitivity pep talk, hear me out. Because what I discovered in the research completely flipped my understanding of what deep thinkers actually are. Most people think deep thinkers are just sensitive people who overthink everything. But that's like saying a Formula One car is just a vehicle that goes fast. You're missing the entire engineering marvel underneath. But here's the problem nobody talks about. We live in a society that's absolutely terrified of depth. Everything is designed for quick, shallow interactions. Social media rewards instant reactions. Schools teach you to memorize, not think. And workplaces? They want efficiency, not insight. So what happens? You start believing there's something wrong with you instead of something wrong with the system. The truth is, every major breakthrough in human progress came from someone who refused to accept surface-level answers. The people who ended slavery, who figured out diseases, who created the technologies we use every day, they were all deep thinkers who saw patterns others missed. Here's what this actually means for you. Your depth isn't the price you pay for being different. It's the gift you bring to a world that desperately needs deeper solutions. And speaking of bringing gifts to the world, if this is resonating with you, do me a favor and hit that like button. It tells me there are more deep thinkers out there who need to hear this message. And drop a comment below. I'd love to know which part of being a deep thinker you struggle with most. Plus, make sure you're subscribed, because we're just getting started on this journey together. We're building towards something bigger here, because recognizing your superpower is just the foundation, but this is where most deep thinkers get stuck. They understand they're different, but they don't know how to protect themselves while using their gifts. That's exactly what we're solving next. So now that you know you're basically a human supercomputer, here's the brutal truth. Most deep thinkers burn out before they ever figure out how to use their gifts effectively. I'm not going to lie to you. I spent years thinking the solution was to just manage my sensitivity better. You know, meditation apps, breathing exercises, trying to care less. Sound familiar? But here's where it gets interesting. What if the problem isn't that you feel too much? What if the problem is that you haven't learned to think strategically about your depth? Let me explain what I mean. Remember when we talked about being a human radar system? Well, imagine if you had the world's most sophisticated radar, but nobody ever taught you how to filter the signals. You'd be overwhelmed by every blip, every movement, every piece of information coming at you. That's exactly what's happening to most deep thinkers. You're picking up everything, other people's emotions, societal problems, future consequences, but you don't have a system for processing it without drowning. Here's what actually happens. Deep thinkers get caught in what psychologists call emotional entanglement. Basically, you can't tell the difference between your emotions and everyone else's. You absorb other people's stress, take on their problems as if they're yours, and end up emotionally exhausted because you're carrying the weight of the world. In other words, your superpower becomes your kryptonite. But here's the thing nobody tells you. Mastering deep thinking isn't about thinking less. It's about thinking more systematically. The difference lies in developing what I call protective wisdom. It's not about building walls around your heart. It's about creating smart filters that let the good stuff in while keeping the toxic stuff out. Think of it this way. A master chef doesn't avoid the kitchen because it's hot and chaotic. They learn to work with the heat, use the right tools, and create something beautiful from the chaos. Same principle applies to your depth. Now, this is important. There are 3 specific phases to mastering this, and most people skip straight to phase 3 and wonder why they're still burning out. Phase 1 is developing what researchers call the self-observer. Think of it as your internal witness, the part of you that can step back and notice what's happening without getting swept away by it. Here's what this actually looks like. When you're feeling overwhelmed, instead of drowning in the emotion, you pause and ask, is this mine or am I picking up someone else's energy? The self-observer helps you recognize when you're taking on other people's stress, anger, or anxiety as if it belongs to you. Mastering this phase means catching yourself in the act of emotional absorption and learning to say, that's interesting, but it's not mine to carry. Phase 2 is boundary setting without losing your empathy. Here's the thing, most deep thinkers think boundaries mean becoming cold or uncaring. But that's like saying a doctor needs to get sick to help patients. What you're actually learning is emotional separation. You can understand someone's pain without making it your pain. You can care about their struggle without taking responsibility for fixing it. The key is what psychologists call empathic understanding versus personal sacrifice. You're developing the ability to hold space for others while protecting your own energy. It's like being a lighthouse. You shine your light to help others navigate, but you stay firmly planted on solid ground. And phase 3? That's where you transform from someone who's overwhelmed by depth into someone who's empowered by it. This is where you integrate everything, your self-awareness, your boundaries, and your natural depth, into what I call purposeful connection. You're no longer hiding from your sensitivity or burning out from it. Instead, you're using it strategically to create meaningful relationships, solve complex problems, and contribute to positive change. You become what the research calls an empowered catalyst, someone who can handle intensity while inspiring others to think deeper too. Here's what this actually means for you. You don't need to choose between being deep and being happy. You just need to learn how to be strategically deep. Speaking from experience, this changed everything for me. But knowing the phases is just the beginning. You need the actual tools to make this work in real life. Now here's where most people get stuck. They understand the phases, they're nodding along, but then they close the video and nothing changes. Let me be honest with you. I used to be the king of consuming self-improvement content without actually implementing anything. I'd watch videos, read books, feel inspired for about 3 days, then fall right back into the same overwhelmed patterns. But here's where it gets interesting. What if the problem isn't your willpower or motivation? What if you just need a system that actually works with how your deep-thinking brain operates? Most productivity advice is designed for surface-level thinkers. Just set a boundary, they say, but they don't tell you what to do when setting that boundary triggers guilt, or when the other person pushes back, or when your empathy starts convincing you that maybe you should make an exception just this once. The truth is, deep thinkers need what I call depth-compatible systems, strategies that honor your complexity instead of fighting against it. Here's what this actually looks like. Remember that self-observer we talked about? Your daily practice starts with what I call the energy audit. Every morning, you spend literally 2 minutes asking yourself 3 questions. How's my emotional tank? What's mine versus what I picked up yesterday? And what's one boundary I need to maintain today? Speaking of boundaries, here's the thing nobody tells you. They're not walls you build once. They're more like garden fences that need daily maintenance. The key is catching boundary violations early, what researchers call micro-boundary management. Instead of waiting until you're completely drained, you check in with yourself hourly and ask, am I still operating from my energy, or am I running on fumes? And here's the game changer. You start building what I call your depth tribe, people who can handle your intensity and contribute their own. Because isolation isn't the answer. Strategic connection is. The difference lies in moving from reactive depth to intentional depth. You're no longer at the mercy of every emotional wave that comes your way. This is why I said earlier that your sensitivity is a superpower, but only when you learn to wield it strategically instead of letting it wield you. Start noticing these patterns today, because awareness is always the first step toward transformation. Remember when I asked if you ever feel like the only one seeing how surface-level conversations are? That feeling of sitting there while everyone's laughing and connecting, but you're thinking there's got to be something deeper here? Well, now you know. You're not the only one, and more importantly, you're not stuck in that isolated observer role anymore. You've gone from thinking your depth was a burden that separates you from others to understanding it's your strategic advantage for creating the meaningful connections you actually want. Mastering deep thinking isn't about perfection or constant improvement, but rather about dedication to the process. As cliché as it might sound, success comes from loving the journey of developing your 3 phases: the self-observer, protective boundaries, and empowered catalyst identity, not rushing to some perfect end state. Be committed to the process. Make sure you stay consistent with those daily energy audits and micro-boundary check-ins. Guys, here's what I want you to remember. Practice with your self-awareness, experience setting boundaries, and hard work. Building your depth tribe with resilient effort beats natural sensitivity alone every single time. Thanks for watching. Subscribe if you want more content on strategic depth and meaningful connections. Leave a thumbs up if this shifted how you see your gifts. See you next time. Peace.